The range officer told Specialist Yeva Marsh to pack up her equipment and go home, and he said it loud enough that the 6 male shooters on the adjacent lanes turned to look. Marsh set down the spotting scope, looked at the target board 240 meters away in the crosswind, and said nothing. She picked up her rifle case, walked to the exit, and on her way out, she stopped at the scoring terminal and entered her confirmation code. The grouping she had posted that morning, 7 rounds, 4.3 centimeters spread at elevation, and with a lateral wind the instruments were still arguing about, was already flagged for review. Not because it was wrong, because the system did not have a category for what she had done, and systems, in Marsh's experience, responded to what they couldn't categorize by flagging it for someone else to explain. Nobody explained it. The flag sat in the queue for 11 days. Then it was closed without comment, and Marsh went back to doing what she had been doing for the previous 3 years, working the logistics desk at CFB Borden and waiting for someone to ask the question she already knew the answer to. The question, when it came, did not come from the base. It came from a civilian, a woman in her late 50s who drove a government-issued sedan that was not registered to any department Marsh could find in the public directory, and who sat down across from her in the coffee room of the logistics building on a Tuesday morning in February and set a folder on the table between them without opening it. Her name was Desjardins, not the Desjardins in the names file. This was a different woman entirely, one whose first name she did not offer, and whose card, when she passed it across the table, listed only a phone number and a phrase that Marsh read twice before she understood it was not a department name, but a designation. Marsh had heard of the designation. She had not expected to hear it in a coffee room at a logistics base while someone poured herself a cup of tea and waited for Marsh to finish reading. "You've been in logistics for 3 years, Desjardins said. That's in the file. You cross-trained in long-range precision shooting before your reclassification. That's also in the file. The reclassification request came from your commanding officer at the time, not from you." Marsh looked at her. "Yes." Desjardins turned the folder around so it faced Marsh and slid it across the table. "Open it." Inside was a single photograph, a topographic printout of a valley somewhere in the kind of geography that appeared in briefings rather than travel guides, and set of coordinates written in pencil at the bottom of the page. Nothing else. "There's a problem at those coordinates," Desjardins said. "That requires someone who can do 2 things simultaneously. Hold a calculation in her head across a variable wind environment and not need to be told what she's looking at before she knows what to do about it. That describes a sniper," Marsh said. "That describes you specifically," Desjardins said. "There's a difference." Marsh looked at the photograph. The valley was familiar in the abstract way that terrain becomes familiar after enough hours studying satellite imagery for logistical routing. She could not have said exactly where it was. She could have said, within perhaps 12 kilometers, approximately where. "Who's at those coordinates?" she asked. "A man named Renard," Desjardins said. She said it the way people say names that carry operational weight, flatly, without ceremony, in the way you might report a barometric reading. "He's been there for 4 weeks. We need him to come out, and the people who currently have an interest in preventing that are positioned in a way that makes conventional extraction inadvisable." "Inadvisable," Marsh said. "The team that went in last month is down 2 people. The window the planners had built into the operation closed 8 days early due to a change in the site's security posture that nobody anticipated, and the analyst who flagged the change did so 48 hours after the team was already inside. So the analyst was late. The analyst was right. She was simply overruled." Desjardins drank her tea. "The man inside needs to come home. There are things he knows that cannot be reconstructed if he doesn't." Marsh closed the folder. She thought for a moment about the scoring terminal at the range, about the flag that had sat in the queue for 11 days, about 3 years of routing supply manifests for a base that didn't need her to route supply manifests. "When?" she asked. "You leave Thursday," Desjardins said, and she took the folder back and stood up and left Marsh alone in the coffee room with her coffee going cold and the specific, quiet feeling of a person who has been waiting for something she wasn't sure was real and has just discovered it is. The briefing happened in a building in Ottawa, that had no signage on the exterior, and whose lobby required 3 separate forms of identification before the elevator would move. Marsh arrived with her kit bag and her range log, and the particular alertness of someone who has learned to read rooms by what they don't contain. This room contained a table, 6 chairs, 2 of which were occupied, and a man named Croft who ran the session with the careful diction of someone reading from a document he has already memorized. The asset's name was Renard, French-Canadian, dual academic background in materials engineering and applied cryptography. Currently, or as of 4 weeks ago, currently, in possession of documented evidence of a coordinated signal interception program running inside a civilian infrastructure contractor with federal government clearances. The evidence, if authenticated, would compromise 3 ongoing CSIS operations and expose 2 individuals holding positions that made them effectively untouchable through standard channels. He walked in voluntarily, said the man beside Croft, whose name Marsh was given as Saul, and who had the look of someone who had not slept horizontally in several days. He went in to make contact with a secondary source who could corroborate the documentation. The secondary source had already been turned. And nobody knew, Marsh said. The analyst knew. She submitted a risk flag on the secondary source 6 days before the meeting. The flag was reviewed and dismissed. Saul pressed his mouth together. By someone who turned out to have a reason to dismiss it. Marsh looked at the topographic printout Croft had laid on the table. 4 weeks in a valley, 2 team members down, a turned source, and a dismissal from inside. She ran the coordinates in her head against the elevation lines, identified the ridge that would carry a shooter's position above the site, and started calculating the wind variables from the latitude and the season. "What's the sight line from here?" she said, touching a point on the printout. "To the structure." Croft looked at where she was pointing. He looked at Saul. He looked back at her. "That's not in the prepared portion of the briefing." "I know," Marsh said. "What's the answer?" A pause. Then Saul said, 380 meters, give or take, through a notch in the eastern ridgeline. Wind, variable. Valley thermals in the morning. Afternoon is cleaner. What time does the site's external patrol rotate? Croft opened a secondary folder and started to answer. He was not finished answering before Marsh had already begun running the numbers. Not theatrically, not with any visible effort. She simply stopped blinking at the rate she had been blinking, which was the only external indication that her attention had redirected from the room to the interior space where the arithmetic lived. She had been doing this since she was 9 years old, working out fall rates and lateral drift on the back of school notebooks, while her classmates worked out long division. She had learned over the years to do it without looking like she was doing anything at all. This, more than the accuracy itself, was the skill that distinguished her, not just the calculation but the invisibility of it. "Afternoon extraction," she said. "I'll need a spotter I can trust not to talk." Croft looked at Saul. "We have Specialist Hargrove. Not someone from the team that's already inside," Marsh said. "Someone who wasn't there when the secondary source was turned." Another silence. Longer this time. "That's a short list," Saul said. "Then it should be easy to choose," Marsh said. Her spotter turned out to be a man named Gials, which was not his operational name, but the name he answered to in the absence of ceremony. He was 43, Quebec-born, had done 2 tours in a capacity that his file described in language designed to make it sound unremarkable, and he wore his competence the same way, unremarkably, without display. He showed up at the insertion point at 0400 with his pack already adjusted and a thermos Marsh could smell from 3 meters away. "Coffee," she said. "From the shop on St. Denis," he said. "You want some?" She did not drink it before a shoot. She told him this. "Good," he said. "More for me." He handed her the thermos, watched her refuse it, poured himself a cup, and from that moment on they understood each other. The insertion took 9 hours on foot, which was 4 hours longer than the original team's approach had taken. Because Marsh had looked at the route on the satellite imagery and identified 2 points where the original approach had traded speed for simplicity in a way that left a 200-meter section exposed to anyone watching from the north ridgeline. Nobody had been watching when the original team went in. By the time Marsh and Gials moved, this was no longer a safe assumption. They came into position at 1342 on the second day, inside the notch, belly to the ground, with the structure 371 meters below and the wind running at 11 kilometers and variable in a pattern Marsh had been reading since she crossed the ridgeline. 371, Gilles said quietly into the scope. I have 371.4, Marsh said. The grade runs slightly south of the survey line, adds .4 effective meters. Gilles was quiet for a moment. I had 371. You did, she said. .4 matters at this range if the wind shifts. He looked at her. Does the wind shift? In 12 minutes, she said. Give or take 2 minutes. The thermal cycle in this valley runs approximately 43 minutes per cycle at this altitude and this time of year. We're coming up on the cold exchange. You've been in this valley before? I've studied this valley's climate data for approximately this latitude and elevation. I haven't been here, but the physics are the physics. Gilles said nothing for a moment. Then, right. Renard came out of the structure at 15:08, which was 17 minutes later than the patrol rotation analysis suggested he should have been able to move, which meant something had changed inside the structure in the previous 24 hours. Marsh tracked him through the scope without comment, reading his movement the way she read everything. For what it told her about the variables she hadn't yet quantified. He was moving carefully, not panicked, not injured in any way that affected his gait, but with the specific conserved energy of someone who had learned in the preceding weeks to spend exactly as much as necessary and nothing beyond. The person who had gone into this valley 4 weeks ago was an academic. The person crossing the compound floor now had learned something in the interim that no academic program teaches. He knows where to step, Gilles said. He's been watching the patrol pattern for longer than we have, Marsh said. Does he know we're here? He knows someone is here. He put his right hand against the wall when he came out of the door. Left-handed people do that when they want their shooting hand free. Gilles turned his head 2 degrees in her direction without lifting his eye from the scope. He's left-handed. His file says ambidextrous with a dominant left. His watch is on his right wrist, which is a tell. The problem arrived 6 minutes later, in the form of 2 men on the northern approach who had not been in any of the site photographs from the past 96 hours. They moved with the unhurried confidence of people who had arrived at the position they had planned to arrive at, which meant they had planned to be there, which meant they knew Renard's window before Renard did, which meant the compromise ran deeper than anyone in Ottawa had calculated. Marsh made 3 adjustments without announcing them. She communicated none of them to Gilles because communicating them would have taken longer than making them. She noted Gilles' silence as acknowledgement that he had seen the same thing and understood that the operational picture had just changed in a way that required her to be the one who decided what happened next. This was the part that the range officer at CFB Borden had not been able to categorize. The arithmetic of a shot was one thing, elevation, wind, distance, breath, the specific calibrated moment between heartbeats when the body is briefly still. The arithmetic of a situation was something else. Most shooters could do the first. Marsh could do both simultaneously in real time, with conditions changing at the speed of decisions made by people who were trying to kill someone she had been sent to recover. I need the northern 2 at the same moment, she said quietly. That's 2 shots, Gilles said. Yes, from one position. I'll move 3 meters left after the first. The valley echo will read as 2 separate positions to anyone listening from below. That's... He stopped. If the wind holds, she said. You said it was about to shift in approximately 4 minutes, she said. The shift will run south-southwest, which works in my favor for the reposition shot if I'm 3 meters left, by the time the thermal exchange completes. The window is about 90 seconds, 90 seconds to take 2 shots, move 3 meters, and take a third position in a notch that I am currently looking at and would describe as having approximately 8 meters of usable ground before the drop-off. 87 seconds, she said. The drop-off is 1.5 meters, not the 2 the survey marks. I checked it when we came in. Gilles was quiet for 4 full seconds. All right, he said. The first shot broke at 15:14. Marsh moved on the echo. Gilles tracked Renard, who had gone flat against the compound wall at the sound. which was correct, which was the behavior of a man who understood that a shot from above him meant someone was working on his behalf, and that the appropriate response was to make himself a smaller problem for that someone to manage. The second shot broke at 15:14 and 31 seconds. The wind shifted at 15:15 and 8 seconds, which was 2 seconds earlier than Marsh's calculation, which meant the thermal cycle was running slightly faster than standard for the altitude, which she filed and did not remark upon because there was no time to remark upon anything. Renard moved at 15:15 and 45 seconds, crossing the open ground between the compound wall and the eastern drainage channel in a way that suggested he had done this exact movement in his head many times and was now simply executing it. He moved without looking up, without looking for her, without any of the hesitation that would have cost him the window. It took 11 more hours to get all three of them back across the ridgeline and to the extraction point. Marsh did not speak for most of it, neither did Renard, which she respected. He had been inside a compromised situation for 4 weeks and was not yet in a position to know who had sent her or what the shape of the next 24 hours was going to be. He walked, and he conserved, and he did not ask questions that he understood would be answered when the situation made answering them possible. Gilles, for his part, carried Renard's pack for the last 4 hours without being asked and without mentioning that he was doing it. The debrief happened in Fredericton, in a building that was a building and not a designation, with windows that opened onto an ordinary street. Marsh sat across from Desjardins again, and this time Desjardins opened the folder on the table, which contained several documents, all of which had Marsh's name on them. Her real name, not the operational routing tag she had been assigned for the crossing. "Renard is safe," Desjardins said. "The documentation he was carrying was authenticated 40 minutes ago by a secondary analyst whose access to the relevant systems cannot be reached by the individuals named in the documentation." "The analyst who was overruled," Marsh said. "A different one. The one who was overruled has been placed on administrative review pending an assessment of the circumstances under which her flag was dismissed." Desjardins set her hands flat on the table. She was right, incidentally, about the secondary source. She'd been right for 3 weeks before she was overruled. "What happens to the people named in the documentation?" "That's not my desk," Desjardins said. "That's a desk I can see from mine, which is not the same thing." Marsh looked at the documents with her name on them. "What are those?" "One is a reassignment," Desjardins said. She slid the top document across the table, "Effective as of the date of your return, out of Borden Logistics, into a role I'm not going to describe in this room because the description is itself classified, but which involves the kind of work you did in that valley for the kind of situations that require it to be done by someone who can run a calculation and a situation simultaneously." "And the other documents?" Desjardins was quiet for a moment. "The reclassification your commanding officer filed 3 years ago has been reviewed. The review found no documented performance basis for the reclassification. It found a documented personal grievance between your commanding officer and your former NDHQ supervisor, which preceded the reclassification by 6 weeks." She looked at Marsh steadily. "The reclassification is being expunged. Your original training designation is being reinstated." Marsh looked at this information the way she looked at wind data. She took it in, she ran it. She did not react to it before she had understood it completely, because reacting before understanding was the error that turned a manageable situation into an unmanageable one. "He reclassified me because of a personal grievance," she said. "Between himself and someone else," Desjardins said. "You were the mechanism through which he expressed it. I spent 3 years routing supply manifests." "Yes, because 2 men who had a problem with each other needed somewhere to put the problem." "That's a precise description," Desjardins said. She did not apologize for it, which Marsh respected more than an apology would have warranted. An apology would have been inaccurate. What had happened was not something Desjardins had done, and naming it accurately was more useful than performing contrition for it. "Okay," Marsh said. She pulled the reassignment document toward her. "What do I sign?" The work that followed was not the kind that produced documents or debriefs or any of the visible artifacts of institutional recognition. It produced outcomes, which is a different kind of record. Marsh kept a personal log, which was not required and not reviewed by anyone. The log was numbers, not names, not events, not the kind of narrative that requires emotional management. Distances, wind readings, elapsed times, error margins, the specific gap between the calculation she made going in and the reality she found when she got there. She tracked the gap. She tried to close it. In the way that people who are very good at one particular thing work at it, not to demonstrate the goodness, but because the gap itself is the problem, and leaving a problem partially solved is not a thing Marsh had the capacity to do comfortably. Gilles became her permanent spotter, which was not how these things typically were arranged, and which was arranged that way anyway, because Marsh asked for it in writing, and Desjardins approved it without comment, which Marsh understood as acknowledgement that the request was reasonable. Gilles, when told, showed no reaction. Then he said, "I'm going to need better coffee than what they had at the insertion point." "That was base issue," Marsh said. "That was an insult to the concept of coffee," he said. "We'll need to address that going forward." They addressed it. It was not the most operationally significant thing they addressed together, but it was among the ones Marsh remembered most clearly. Later, when she was trying to explain to a younger specialist, who had just been reclassified by a commanding officer, for reasons that had nothing to do with her performance, how it was possible to come out on the other side of an institution deciding you were something you weren't. "You run the numbers," Marsh said. The specialist looked at her. "What numbers?" "Whatever numbers are yours," Marsh said. "The thing you know how to do that the form doesn't have a category for. You keep running it. You don't stop because someone filed a piece of paper that said to stop. The paper was wrong. The numbers are still the numbers." The specialist was quiet. She was young enough that being told the paper was wrong mattered to her in a way that it would eventually stop mattering, which is its own kind of progress. "How do you know when someone will finally ask?" "You don't," Marsh said. "You just make sure the answer is ready when they do." Outside the building, somewhere across the parking lot, a raven landed on the roof of a government sedan and looked at nothing in particular with the specific, patient attention of a creature that had no deadline and no filing requirement and was therefore in no hurry at all. Marsh watched it for a moment through the window. Then she went back to the numbers.